Welcome to our Driving Matters Vodcast series, produced by the Traffic Injury Research Foundation in partnership with cooperators. Learning to drive is such an important step towards independence, but it is a privilege that comes with a lot of responsibility. Young drivers have the highest crash risk of all age groups because of their young age and inexperience. Driver education programs are an important tool to help young people recognize risks and practice driving in a safe environment. This podcast series is designed to answer common questions about driver education submitted by teens and their parents, and share tips to help them practice driving while staying safe. Our co-hosts Karen and Kylie are sharing their experiences as a parent-teen duo going through the process.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our podcast, Driving Matters, by the Traffic Injury Research Foundation in partnership with cooperators. For this podcast, we're talking about some keys to success during the learning to drive process and how parents can help. I'm Karen Bowman. I am the director of the Drop It and Drive program at the Traffic Injury Research Foundation and director of marketing communications. I am also a parent. This is my daughter.
Hello, I am Kylie Bowman. I am a young driver who's gone through the said courses. I am also a crash survivor from when I was 8 years old.
Hi, I'm Robin Robertson. I'm the president and CEO of the Traffic Injury Research Foundation and a road safety researcher for more than 20 years. So our organization has been very involved in working with governments to help improve driver education programs. And we're happy to have two other guest experts with us. Amanda is the manager of driver education and training for class 4 and 5 with Saskatchewan Government Insurance.
And I'll introduce Anne-Marie Hayes, as president at Teens Learn to Drive. She's also a certified driving instructor and author of 3 Keys to Keeping Your Teen Alive, Lessons for Surviving the First Year of Driving. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We appreciate you making the time. So we had more than 400 questions from parents and teens from across the country asking about how parents and teens can work together and work through the learning to drive process. So that's where we're going to start today. Amanda and Anne-Marie, let's start with the most important question, which is how important is it for parents to be involved as their teens learn to drive?
It's absolutely crucial for a whole bunch of reasons. Some parents will teach their teens to drive. Others will send them to a driving school, which I really recommend. But in either case, parents should really they're an integral part of learning to drive. In part because standard driving courses only offer about 10 hours behind the wheel. Driving is incredibly complex. Not to mention the fact that you're driving with so many other vehicles, other drivers, pedestrians, bicycles. It's complicated. So they need a great deal of practice. And that's where really parents come in as role models, as coaches when they're practicing. And it's really important that parents be part of that.
Amanda, your thoughts?
I would definitely agree with Anne-Marie. Part of driving education is kind of the foundation for your history as a driver, and it's a new exciting process. So I think it's critical that parents or guardians are involved with the learning process to really help build that foundation. I think people start to take driving for granted, and it's a skill that we use every day. And if you're not prepared at the start of your educational journey with that, then you're going to start to struggle as you go along. So learning those really important skills at the beginning will really help shape you into a great driver in the future.
Thank you. So before we get to one of the most popular questions that came in from teens across Canada on this topic, this is something I think Kylie can relate to. For me, as a 2-time crash survivor, I already have sort of a heightened awareness and possibly a bit of anxiety around driving. Once you've been hit a couple of times, it changes you a bit. So one of the things that Kylie and I experienced when she was going through driver education was practicing with me was a very different experience for her than practicing with her dad. So my husband Daryl's been driving for many, many years and also for work, and his level of experience is different. He's not been in the same kind of collisions that I have. So you actually found it a lot less stressful to do practice driving with your dad than with me.
Yep. Yes, I did.
One of the most popular questions we got from teens was, how do I keep my parents calm while I'm going through the process of learning how to drive? And the flip side to that as a parent is, how do I stay calm while my teen is learning how to drive? And especially if you've experienced a crash yourself, or if thankfully you're one of those people who hasn't, but you might still have some anxiety around sort of the most precious person in the world to you is now going to be out there on the road. So do you have any tips on that? And we'll lob this one to you first, Amanda.
I think the most important piece when you're starting to learn to drive is that you're planning those sessions. So you know what you're going to be working on for that day. It's not just as simple as, you toss your teen the keys and you say, all the best, away we go. It's when you hit the road, you have a plan and you've communicated that plan and you're both aware of it. Maybe for the day, you're going to work on practicing your left and your right turns, which intersections you're going to go to. You have an idea of how long it's going to last. And you're both prepared for some of those frustrations that come up, and it's okay to take a break. So if you're out there and maybe your teen isn't comfortable in a particular area of the city, or maybe you've gone a little too far, it's okay to pull over and regroup, or switch and end your training session. I think that's probably the most important piece when it comes to learning how to drive, especially for teens and for parents, is that you're prepared for those training sessions and that you kind of both have an expectation of what's about to happen and that you're both comfortable. If you have a new driver in the car, you maybe don't want to take them out on the highway for their first day. You're maybe going through a residential area, and you're prepared for that.
I think that's a great point, Amanda. Is how we often sometimes think about driving as adults. We think about it as almost rote behavior, and it comes very easily. So I think your suggestion in terms of mapping out what those sessions look like, so that there's a clear understanding of what you're going to be doing on the road, and instead of really just making it up as you go along, can really do a lot to reduce stress. So Anne-Marie, your thoughts?
I would start by saying you need some ground rules. I agree with everything Amanda said, but I'd also start with some ground rules. For example, when you're in the car, you're concentrating on driving, nothing else. This is not the time to talk about that math test you failed, or if you can get that sweater in green. Really, you need to concentrate on driving and nothing else. So everything else is put aside while you're behind the wheel. Then from there, as Amanda said, plotting out where you're going to go. I would start in an empty parking lot, and I would start with really simple things like starting and stopping, gradual starting. Gradual slowing down and stopping, and then at higher speed and stomping on the brake. So you feel what that's like when you have to stop suddenly. One of the things with ABS is sometimes young people hear that grinding, think they did something wrong, and release the brake. If you need to stomp on the brake, you need to know what it feels like. I would also keep the initial lessons to like 20 minutes. Later on, you can take a break when you're going further afield, but 20 minutes is a lot of driving. And starting with in a parking lot to get those basic feeling of space and how big the car is and all of those things, and then moving on to residential streets, quiet streets when there's not a lot of traffic around, and gradually introducing more difficulty. I would always start with right turns. And then later left turns, because that's a much more complicated maneuver.
Well, just as you were talking, Anne-Marie and Amanda, a couple of things occurred to me that worked really well for Kylie and I and her dad, and that was going into the shopping mall parking lots after closing hours and just learning about the size of the vehicle. So we have a Jeep and we also have a car. They drive very differently. So depending on what vehicle you're practicing in, just the basics of placing the vehicle between the two lines for parking and then using the parking lot as a protected area to be able to start practicing those right-hand turns and recognizing that you're driving a small car, you're not driving a B train, so you don't have to swing wide to take that right-hand turn. So even before we're getting onto some residential streets, just using the lines that were in the parking lot to help position the car.
But even before you actually even get into the car, just talking with your guardian beforehand, just so they actually understand exactly what you're going to be going through while you're driving. It's essentially learning how to walk again. As they've been driving for a long time, a lot of things are second nature, When you're just starting, nothing's second nature. You have to think about every individual task. Which way do I flip the indicator to make it go left? And then even though there's only 2 pedals to hit, you second guess yourself. It's like, okay, wait, do it. Oh no. So it's just the making sure that your parents aren't too harsh on you, and they need to go through exactly all these little pieces that they take advantage of essentially at the point where they're at it's second nature to just do this shoulder check, flip the indicator. It's not second nature for us at this moment.
And I think that really underscores the importance of driver education, because exactly what you just said. We've been driving for years. We don't even think about the indicator or shoulder checking or adjusting high beams or anything. It does come second nature, but when you go through driver education, they are trained to break it down to that lower level for you and build those foundations up from there, so that when you come to practicing with parents or guardians, then you're reinforcing what you've been taught in driver education.
I think that's a good point. When it comes to driving, we think about it as very natural and very easy to do, and we do tend to underestimate the complexity as adults. So the reality is driving is a divided attention task, which means there are manual elements, there are visual elements, and then there's the thinking, the cognitive process, the decision making. And as adults, all of those different pieces of input come together and work well. But for teens, keeping in mind that as they learn to drive, they are learning the manual control of the vehicle, the visual scanning and identification of hazards, and then the decision making that comes with what do I do with that information and what's my safe choice. So I think that's a great point for Kylie to bring out for parents to remember when they're teaching their teen to drive. So let's talk a little bit about logbooks and how they can help parents and teens with respect to making sure they're hitting all those elements in the practice driving and learning to drive and moving gradually from the simple tasks to the more complex environments.
One of the first things you need to do is set yourself up to drive. That means setting your mirrors properly. That means adjusting your headrest, all of those kinds of things. Even before you start anything else, you have to start there. But logbooks can really help, first of all, make sure you're getting enough practice. In the first year, a minimum is 50 hours of practice. 100 hours is better. And that's basically 2 hours a week. And that's not jump in the car and let's go to the grocery store. That's, as Amanda said earlier, it's really structured practice where you're going to concentrate on these skills today. Today, we're going to start with starting and stopping and those kinds of things. I think that logbooks can really help, because one of the biggest mistakes that parents make is you're learning to drive in the summer, the days are long, it's raining today, I don't think we'll go today, we'll pick it up again tomorrow. Well, they're going to be driving in the rain. And then somewhere along the line, they start practicing. Then it's going to snow, and you need to go back and work in snow. Stopping is different in snow. Speeds adjust in snow. What do you do around the snow plow? Where are you going to find black ice? Now, I know on the islands you don't get a lot of that, and there are parts of Canada that don't get a lot of that, but there are parts of Canada that get a lot of snow and ice. And the world is big today. Just because a student grew up on Vancouver Island doesn't mean they're going to be driving on Vancouver Island all their life, right? They need to learn how to drive in different kinds of weather, light conditions, roads. Driving in a neighborhood is different than a rural road, is different than a highway. But always making sure that what you're practicing is within the graduated driver licensing rules in your province or territory.
That's a great point about all different conditions. Amanda, could you maybe touch a little bit about on how important it is for teens to practice driving continuously and to make sure that they're hitting those, different driving conditions, different winter conditions, the different elements and issues that we see out on the road, and have continuous experience working through those?
When it comes to driving, you want to be prepared for something before it becomes an emergency. And in Saskatchewan, we experience 4 seasons of weather in 24 hours. So it's not uncommon to it be nice and sunny in the morning, and then it's snowing and icy in the afternoon. Having a logbook can really prepare you for that, because then you get the chance to go through and see, well, I've driven in the rain, I've driven on a sunny day, I've driven in the snow, I've driven on the highway. You're preparing yourself as a driver and getting ready so that you're comfortable, so that when you're an experienced driver and you're on your own, you have those skills when that inclement weather pops up, or you're out on a sunny day and it starts to rain and then you're stuck and you got to get back to wherever it is that you're going. So those logbooks really support that, and getting prepared for those situations when you have somebody in the vehicle to help guide you and tell you how to respond to that is definitely far more comfortable than all of a sudden being stuck out in the middle of the prairies where, oh my gosh, it's snowing and I'm not sure what to do. Well, you've practiced that, you're prepared for that situation. And another thing that Anne-Marie brought up is, if you look at Canada, the type of driving that you're going to get from coast to coast is dramatically different. I'm from the prairie, so it's very flat, very few turns. It's pretty easy. I can see a lot of things that are ahead of me. But when I drive out in the mountains, it's a totally different experience. Getting lots of time behind the wheel is going to prepare you for all those different situations so that you're ready when you come across them as an experience.
It's fair to say that island winters are different than the rest of Canada. However, I think it's also important to note that, there are some changes happening there as well. We've been hit with a couple of sudden snowstorms out of nowhere. And also, just depending on where you're traveling on the island, as soon as you get to the top of the Malahat summit, you can be facing fog. You can actually run into black ice on the roads. You can run into the occasional snow squall that, granted, it won't last for weeks, but if you're not prepared for that and you're just assuming, well, I live in a really nice part of Canada that we don't get 6 feet of snow in the winter, doesn't mean you won't run into those situations where you are going to have to be ready to drive in the different weather. I mean, I remember the first time you had to drive down to Victoria.
Yes.
Over the Malahat.
It's hard to forget.
What was it like for you compared to driving locally around it, the residential neighborhood and all that, and our highways, but then you're going to a complete different area, because also the density in Victoria is very different than the density here in Nanaimo.
Yes. Well, being unfamiliar with the roads really adds to just the anxiety of driving up there. And then the winding roads around the mountains and it being a highway. It's kind of that not so beginner trek to go through.
It's a little bit more advanced, so just not assuming because of where you live that, well, the summers are always this way, so if I've learned to drive in the summer, then I'm good to go. I remember the first time going through a construction zone, and all of a sudden now you're not just watching the road and pedestrians, but you've got a flagger, and obviously we want to keep all our roadside workers safe. So now you're looking out for a lot of different things that you maybe don't get specific training on in driver education. But like you were saying, Anne-Marie, you want to talk about driving with your teens. You want to have these conversations, because even though it might not fall under the official part of their driver education, or perhaps during the entire time you're practicing, for some odd reason you never actually go through construction, it's important for them to understand these are some of the things that you could find yourself running into, where all of a sudden it's now no longer two-way traffic. Now it's alternating single lane traffic, and now you're going to go from a paved road to where they've ripped up all the paving, and you're going to have the different sensation under your wheels that feels very different, because now you're on loose gravel and that type of scenario.
I'm planning ahead. When I drove down to Ucluelet and Tofino in the summer, I failed to plan ahead and realized that there was construction going on, and they closed it for 3 hours at 11.
Kylie, talking about your experience going down the Malahat, I can imagine, Karen, for you it was very nerve-wracking because, the Malahat is a busy highway, and, there have been a number of collisions on it. So to have your daughter driving down there, I imagined, gave you some stress as a parent. So how did you deal with that, and how did you help prepare Kylie to do that?
Funnily enough, one of the ways that we prepared both our kids, and our youngest isn't at driving age yet, is we do watch some dash cam videos on YouTube. And although some of them are just strictly entertaining, others have great examples where you don't actually have to go through the situation yourself to point out these are some of the risk factors to look for. So going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, even though Kylie herself hadn't driven the Malahat before, she'd certainly been a passenger with us many times during the Malahat. So when we were going through the planning process and she was going to be driving down the Malahat for the first time, we talked through a lot of these, some of the things you're going to run into. You are likely going to run into people who want to go above the speed limit. That doesn't mean that you need to do that. Make sure you're in, you're in the slow lane, and when it goes to 2 lanes, they can pass you and do their own thing. But you focus on following the rules of the road, because that's what's going to keep you safe, and just being prepared for some of those really tight twists and turns. A lot of it is really communication, talking it through, and then also the practice that we had done together, whether it was with me or with her father or with both of us, that gave us the confidence that she really had a good head on her shoulders about how she was actually driving, how she was able to identify risk. And that's something that takes some time to build up that experience. But again, in talking to Kylie about some of the risks that we've run into, it helped her be more aware of some of the risks that are a little bit more unexpected. And then at some point, you just have to put your faith in the fact that your kid's done the driver education and they've done the practicing, and at some point you've got to let them go do it. And then also reinforcing things like, obviously Kylie is well familiar with her phone gets turned off when she's in the car, but communicate with us when you get to where you're going and you're parked safely out of the flow of traffic in a parking lot or your friend's driveway. Send us a quick text and just let us know that you got there safely. That was really the biggest thing for us. We know about how long it takes to get where you're going, and if we haven't heard from you, then that's going to raise the anxiety level a little bit.
Right. So Anne-Marie, we were talking a lot about preparation. So are there things that parents can do working with the driver educator in terms of improving practice driving and really giving their teen the kinds of support that they need when learning to drive?
Well, I definitely think that parents should be debriefing teens after lessons. What did you learn? How was the experience? One of the things that is a particular issue for me is driving instructors who are on their cell phones. Or not paying attention, because they are the second set of eyes on the road. And so I would ask about that. Is your instructor using their cell phone? And that's something that definitely parents should complain about. That's not acceptable. But one of the other things that I wanted to talk a little bit about was communication. And the words you choose when you're the coach is really important too. For example, use right only as a direction, never as agreement, because otherwise you could get into a situation where I want you to turn left at the next intersection. You want me to turn left? Right. It becomes very, very confusing, right? So right is only a direction in the car. Only you use agreed or yes or correct for agreement. Another one is don't try to trick them. Don't tell them to turn right if there's a no right turn on that street. At the next street where you can make a safe turn, please make a right turn. Those kinds of things. Instead of, how fast are you going? What's the speed limit here? Reminders for them to check, but that helps ease the anxiety too. And back to being in the car, some driving schools will allow you to sit through a driving class. You'd have to check with the school, check with the instructor. But if they do allow it, you are not allowed to speak. You can't interact, you can't talk. You have to find out what the rules are, but some will let you do that, and at least you'll be able to hear the language they're using. But you never want to turn right here. It's when you can make a safe turn, please make a right turn. When it's safe to do so. Don't try to trick them. Don't try to surprise them. Help them, and that helps the anxiety too. And if they miss a turn, no problem. You go to the next one and you circle around and come back if you want to go through that intersection.
So Amanda, one of the other really popular questions we got from parents and teens was whether or not driver education is a substitute for parental supervised practice sessions. If they can just rely on the fact, well, they're enrolled in driver education, so that takes care of it.
Yeah, that's something that we hear fairly often. Oh, my kid is in driver ed, I don't need to help them. And I don't agree with that. You definitely need to help them and support them and work with them and give them that practice that they need. A lot of people take driving for granted. It's something that we do every single day. And depending on where you are, it's a huge form of how you get around if there isn't the public transportation in your area. So for those parents that think that they don't need to help their student or help them learn those techniques and those skills, I would say that you're setting them up for a position that they may not be the safest driver on the road. And that could cause them to get injured. That could cause them to cause a crash or a collision. And we certainly don't want to do that. The priority of driver education is safety. We're trying to put safe drivers out on the road. And by having that opportunity to practice with a parent, guardian, neighbor, uncle, whoever is available to work as a supervising driver who has the skills and feels comfortable with that, you're definitely setting that student up for success down the road, and you're going to make them safer. And by making them safer, we're going to make the road safer for everybody else who's out there.
I think you're absolutely right, Amanda. I mean, the research certainly shows that when parents are actively involved in their teens learning to drive and making sure that they're complying with the different rules and requirements with respect to driver education and graduated driver licensing, and they're reinforcing those rules, we see that the teens are less likely to be crash involved and less likely to engage in risky behavior. So I guess as a last question before we close out, it would be great if you both could provide some information with respect to taking the exam, the road test exam, and what are things that teens can do to prepare. And I know the licensing authorities have a number of resources to help support that. So Anne-Marie, if you wanted to just talk a little bit about that in Ontario, and then we'll hear about it in Saskatchewan.
In Ontario, the test is between 8 and 20 minutes. And it's when teens are absolutely the most attentive and undistracted that they will ever be. So you need to teach beyond the road test. Teach for, as we talked about earlier, different types of situations. And you can go to the test center and drive through the route. You can't do it in a driver's ed car, but you can do it in your own car to make sure that they know where the stop signs are and those kinds of things. But don't just teach to the test. Teach them to be good, safe, thinking drivers that make good choices.
I agree with Anne-Marie. The road test isn't something, we're not here to stump students. We're not throwing something that they haven't seen before. It's really about testing the basic knowledge that they have. But the important thing is, are they prepared to be a driver on the road on their own without a supervising driver? Another tip for students to consider is you have a learning period. In Saskatchewan, it's 9 months from when you get your learner's license to when you're eligible to take your road test. 9 months and you have to be 16 years old. So something to consider before you go out on that road test is maybe not a bad idea to work with a driving instructor again for a couple of sessions to ensure you didn't pick up any of those minor bad habits that your parent or your supervising driver may have accidentally taught you. There's also tons of resources out there that you can access. We have our Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook on our website. It can be translated into any language that's available on Google Translate. So there's tons of other online resources like TURF. YouTube has some great videos. Even TikTok is starting to have some driver education stuff out there, which is very cool. So I would say for those that are getting ready for their road test, don't just practice for your road test. That's just a tiny blimp in your driving experience. Yes, you need it to get your full license and get into the graduated program, but once you get that license, you're going to be driving for a lifetime, and not just in your jurisdiction, but you could be going around the world as a driver, depending on where your life takes you. So don't just focus on practicing. What does the route look like? What am I going to be expected to do in that 20-minute exam? How am I going to be prepared to be the best driver and the safest driver on the roads? So not only am I safe, but I'm keeping others safe. And I think that's a great way to look at it, because once you pass that road test, you're out there on your own. You're now into the graduated driver's licensing program, and depending on your jurisdiction, you'll have to follow those rules. But now that's just the start to your driving experience.
So I think there definitely are a lot of great resources out there. I know for a lot of parents and teens, they're interested in terms of where they can find out more. Where can I find the driver log books? Where can I find the handbooks? Where can I find out more about the tests? So on TURF's Young and New Driver Resource Center, we have compiled the list of the licensing authorities, and there are easy links to not only the standards for driver education, the requirements for driver education, but also a checklist for parents and teens to use in terms of picking a driving school that's going to meet their needs, and that's going to be able to give their teen driver a well-rounded experience with all of those different complex situations that we talked about.
So before we wrap up this episode of Driving Matters, I'm going to throw the last question to you, Kylie, because this was another really popular one. How do I know when I'm ready to drive solo? And I remember you and I having quite a number of conversations about that. It was really different doing driver ed and practicing with us, but the first time you went solo, which granted was not the Malahat drive, was not the first solo drive, but that first time, where was your head at? What thought process did you go through to realize, okay, I'm ready to go on my own now?
After I completed the road test and I felt comfortable with reverse parking, changing lanes, like a lot more driving technicalities became more second nature. So I wasn't still in that, wait, am I turning, should I look? I don't know. It was a bit more natural. And then when I decided to go out on my own, I went with a route that I was very familiar with. I didn't want to go out and surprise myself and like, yeah, let's try this new highway. This is how we're gonna go. It was just a quick little around the block as I was by myself, and you start going further around as you get more used to it, and also getting used to that there's not a second set of eyes to warn you with things. You feels like you have to be even more attentive because there's no one gonna be like, hey, watch that car over there. But once you're comfortable with the basics and you're beyond stuttering over what you have to do, then that's pretty well when you know.
Any final thoughts from you, Amanda, on that first solo drive?
I would say you got it right, Kylie. When you're comfortable, that's when you're ready. Obviously, the first step is when you're eligible to drive by yourself and you don't need to have a supervising driver. And if you don't feel comfortable on a busy highway, don't drive on the busy highway. Stick to what you know. And if you feel like you need more practice or more experience, don't hesitate to reach out, whether that's to your parents or your driving instructor or maybe other resources that are out there. So don't think that once you have that fancy, shiny driver's license in your wallet that you're ready to go. Practice, practice, practice. That's the most important thing about driver education.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Anne-Marie, any final thoughts on the first solo drive?
Parents should have an agreement with their teens about what's allowable in the car, what's not allowable, staying within the speed limit, those kinds of things. Because if there is an agreement with real penalties, this happens, you can't drive for a month, and you enforce the penalties, it not only helps reinforce what they should do and shouldn't do, but it also gives them an out. If they're in a situation where someone's saying, come on, you can catch up with them, let's go. And it's like, if I do, and I get a speeding ticket, my mom said I can't drive for next month, and that means we can't go wherever. So they have to be real consequences that you'll enforce, but that can be even loaning the car. I'm just going to grab a pizza. Give me your keys. Well, does that kid have a driver's license? Do you want that person driving your car too? If you have a list of rules, and also the other big rule is if you ever get stuck anywhere and you didn't intend to drink, you didn't intend to smoke, whatever, and you ended up impaired, I don't care where you are, I don't care what time it is, I will come and get you, no questions asked. We'll talk about it later, because I would so much rather pick you up at 3 o'clock in the morning across town than identify your body, in the morgue on Monday. So it's that serious, impaired driving. So put those rules in place and enforce them. And I think that's a great start to having them drive alone.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us on this episode of our Driving Matters podcast. And thanks also to our returning guest expert, Robin and Kylie.
And also to cooperators for making it possible for us to answer some of these questions for parents and teens across the country. Thank you for tuning in to our Driving Matters Vodcast series, produced in partnership with cooperators. Please join us for other episodes. TURF is a registered Canadian charity with a number of free education programs about leading risks on the road, as well as ways to stay safe. They provide access to fact sheets, infographics, and blogs to download and share. Start a conversation about the reasons you choose to avoid risks on the road. To learn more and access these free resources to support safer roads, visit www.turf.ca. That's TIRF.ca. Working together, we can all help everyone get home safe every day.